department with Jesus stamped on it. A lot of times customer service departments are to give people a great experience in return for their transactions, loyalty, to come back. And I think that's good, and I think the intention behind that is good if we apply it to a church, for us to give a great experience for people to come back and for people to be here. But is that it? Is that everything? Is all that we do just to try to get people to come back here? And my hope is that it's not, and that it's actually something greater, and it's something deeper, and that it taps into an element of our human beings that go further than just the consumption of a really good experience. Because at the end of the day, people aren't just looking for a great experience. People are looking for belonging. People aren't just looking for a great experience. More so than ever before, people are looking for belonging. Get this. Americans are currently ranked amongst the loneliest people in the entire world. More than ever before in the history of our country, people are yearning for friendship and community and connection. Just within the last couple of months, there was a big medical study by Cigna that researched 20,000 Americans over the age of 18 and found that nearly half of Americans sometimes or always feel alone. And only half of Americans have meaningful in-person social interactions on a daily basis. And the result from this study is concluding that America is currently in a loneliness epidemic. They are using the language of epidemic because of people feeling so disconnected. And the implications of this is crazy. You would never think that loneliness would have as big of an impact on people as you would think. And if it's 50% of Americans, then that technically means 50% of our congregants are experiencing this as well. And so just to put this into perspective for you, psychologist Amy Banks writes that the human brain is built to operate within a network of caring human relationships. But when we are cut off from others, these neural pathways in our brain suffer, resulting in chronic irritability, anger, depression, addiction, and chronic physical illness. Loneliness increases stress levels, which makes you more liable to make unhealthy behaviors, and it also lowers sleep quality, so you can't even be well prepared for the next day. But even more so, loneliness, when you're in a constant state of loneliness, it puts you in this hyper-awareness mode for dangerous social environments. In other words, your body goes into self-preservation mode as a means of protecting you from any potential threat that's out there. So we all know those people who come in and are just really irritable and chronically just always pessimistic, and we're like, why are you in just such a bad mood all the time? It might be because they're lonely, because they're hesitant, because they just feel like everyone is out to get them, and so it is a defense mechanism. And the problem with that is they don't trust people, and so they become cynical, and because they are cynical, people don't want to be around with them, and which just increases their distrust of other people, just driving them deeper and deeper and deeper into this state of loneliness. It's a sick cycle. And more people are struggling with it than we could ever imagine. And when your brain is just constantly in that state of self-preservation mode, those stress hormones are just coursing through your body because of loneliness, it wears and tears your body down to increase early odds of death, or odds of early death, by 45%. You have a 30% chance of increased odds of early death through excessive drinking, to put that in perspective. A constant state of loneliness has the same wear and tear on your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And 50% of our congregants are struggling with this. Maybe even 50% of you guys technically could be struggling with this. So my theory is that we're not designed just to consume really great experiences all the time. No, instead we're designed for community. We're wired for belonging. We are wired for belonging because on the flip side, there's tons of crazy science that talks about just how we are designed for belonging and how much we need this. Jonathan Haidt, who's a moral psychologist, writes that we are an ultra-social species, full of emotions, finely tuned for loving, befriending, helping, sharing, and otherwise intertwining our lives with others. He goes on to say, if you want to predict how happy someone is or how long she will live, you should find out about her social relationships. Because having strong social relationships strengthens the immune system, extends life more than does quitting smoking, speeds recovery from surgery, and reduces the risks of depression and anxiety disorders. But even beyond that, studies are showing that people in community have a greater sense of meaning and purpose with their lives. So according to Dr. Henry Cloud, and this is crazy, he writes, the quality of our most significant relationships determine how long we live, whether we reach our goals or not, how much money we make, how well our kids do in school. Comes back down to how good your friends are, what your community is, how much we trust people, how we cope with stress and failure, what kind of mood we're in, how much physical pain we experience, and how and what we think. No wonder people are longing for community more than ever before, because our brains just function so much better when we are in these communities where we feel like we can belong. And there's an entrepreneur, leadership guru, his name is Simon Sinek, who writes a lot about this in his book called Leaders Eat Last. It's so good. And he talks mainly about how in our work environments, what people need isn't just to strive for numbers and for us to push results and for us just to crank out all of these tasks. Like, humans are not these lonesome agents who are robots just to crank out results, but rather how we best produce our results and our jobs when we feel safe and when we can feel like we belong. And that's actually a phenomenon that goes all the way back to the earliest stages of our species, back even in our hunter and gatherer stages, because when we used to live, we functioned in tribes. Primarily, right? We functioned in tribes. That could be anywhere from 20 people, maybe all the way up to 150 people is the maximum. And so what Simon Sinek talks about, this is a great marker. I love this. That's close enough. Is he calls this the circle of safety. The circle of safety. And as long as you feel like you belong to the tribe, you are able to survive and fight against the dangers that exist outside of this circle of safety. There we go. We'll do this. So whether that's literally like you're out and you're hunting and you're trying to gather food and all this other stuff for your tribe, or even whatever threats are out there, as long as you feel like you belong to your circle of safety, you're going to survive and you're going to function optimally. But as soon as you fall outside of that, danger is going to come in. It's going to threaten you, and then you're going to feel pressure, which then puts you into that self-preservation mode. You see that? And so, all that to say, people are at their best when they belong to community. People are at their best when they belong to community. So it makes you wonder why Jesus created the church, right? Because if you think about it, and why he sent his disciples out in pairs of two in these little circles of safety, because literally the church functions as a circle of safety. It is a tribe where when you feel like you belong, you are safe from the dangers of a sin-filled world and all the threats and persecutions that the evil one wants to throw out at you. And then when you feel like you belong and you're safe, then you are able to actually grow to how God designed you to be, and for you to actually go out into mission and to go out there, find the one person, and then get them back in there. That is why it is so crucial to have belonging within the church. And so that is where guest services comes into play. Because it looks a little different for a church of 2,400 and campuses of, ranging between 400 to 600 people per service. Because at the Ransom Church, we exist to set captives free. Exactly. That's our mission statement. We say it every single week. We exist to set captives free. And what I want to propose is that guest services exists to set captives free through creating belonging. For us creating a space where people can come in here, because you're only going to be set free when you truly can experience the safety and the belonging of a church community. And so, your role is vastly more important than making coffee. Your role is vastly more important than passing out handouts at the door. Your role is vastly more important than What else do you guys do? Like cleaning up Mountain Dew spills. Like you guys do like so much more than I could even imagine. At the end of the day, you are culture makers. At the end of the day, you are culture makers. And every single task we do that we know and we love so much about guest services, it's just simply an invitation to extend hospitable interactions that communicates to every person that you belong here. That is what we are about. So how do we do this? How do we actively do this? Because here's the reality. Guest services is a ministry filled with tiny surface level interactions. Right? It's pretty rare for you to be greeting at a door and you shake hands with somebody and then you just connect in an instant and then you're like best friends forever and then you go and you talk for an entire hour during the service, like that's very, very rare for that to happen. But rather it's a bunch of those tiny little interactions like, a brief interaction at coffee or at a door or whatever. So it's a bunch of these little things. So how do we create belonging through all these little interactions? What we have to understand is that belonging is something much bigger than just the kind of a culture that we're making. Because in order for every person to discover belonging, they actually have to have a significant connection in this phenomenon that Joseph R. Myers calls the 4 spaces of interaction, or the 4 dimensions of belonging. So for a human being to be healthy, they need to have significant connection in all 4 of these spaces. So I'm going to try to, we'll see how this goes. You'll probably get the general idea. And so these 4 spaces, wow, the Lord is good. Look at that. Oh, that is, well, it'll write a little bit better. Awesome. Sweet. So the very first space that you need to have significant belonging in is called the public space. And so the public space is large gatherings of places, maybe 32 plus, where you don't know anybody in the room. But you're all there for a common purpose. So when you go to a coffee shop, you don't know everybody in the coffee shop, but you're all there for a common purpose of coffee or interaction or working on stuff, right? Or when you go to a Twins game, you don't know anybody in that stadium, but you're all there for the common purpose of cheering on the Twins, if you're into that. I personally not. Or if you go to your favorite restaurant or whatever, the common purpose is what drives you together. And so it's the same thing with the ransom on a weekend worship service. When you come in, you are coming into the public space, the public worship space. So this is the public space, the lobby is a public space. As soon as you park your car, that's a public space. You don't know anybody around you, but you're gathered there because of the common purpose of attending the ransom, of worshiping. That's the public space. Then after that, you have the social space. And the social space is defined by giving snapshots of who you are to other people. So when you have those a common example I use is when you go and you get your hair cut and they're cutting your hair and you're just sharing little bits and pieces of your life and your information about yourself. Like you're sharing snapshots of who you are to get a good idea of who they are. And so a lot of times this is our guest services teams, or like when you're starting to interact with people, you're just getting a good idea. You wouldn't necessarily define them as a friend you're going to hang out with all the time, but they're a good acquaintance. You have a good familiar idea of who they are, which naturally leads to the personal space as the next one. So these are going to be your closer friends. They maybe know a little bit more about your stories from your crazy days in college, or maybe they're going to be the first people who are going to respond to you when a crisis happens. These are maybe more of life groups often get into this. Life groups kind of fall in between here, even within our guest services teams. If you serve for a while, you're going to start developing these personal friends, those natural friends you go to, which is really, really good. And then finally, the intimate space. You only have between 1 to 3 people in this space. This is the kind of relationship where they know everything about you, your deepest, darkest parts of you, and they still don't judge you, and they still love you. As a spouse, maybe that's a mentor, maybe that's a spiritual friend or a disciple or something along those lines. So these are the 4 spaces of interaction, the 4 dimensions of belonging. So you got to ask then, which space is guest services responsible for? Someone shout it out. Just give it a shot. so close. Intimate. I would argue, and they do involve all of them. They do involve all of them. But what we are primarily responsible for as a ministry is the public space. It's the public space. It's creating the culture for as soon as people come here, they're like, this is where I need to be. The thing that comes back, the thing that the people are so friendly, they don't know who specifically, but the culture of friendliness is defined here by what we do in the public space. So what that means is when we're creating a culture of belonging from the public space, then that basically means that we as guest services serve as the entryway for people being set free to discover belonging in these other three spaces. It starts here. Generally speaking, it starts here. As soon as they come through our doors and they feel like they can connect here, then that's going to, maybe if they enjoy their experience so much, they're going to come out to the hub, where they talk with one of you guys and they get to share a little bit more about their story. And so we move them into the social space. And then maybe eventually they start coming for another couple of months, and then they're like, I really want to get involved. And they join a guest services team. And so now they're much more into the social space and maybe even the personal space here, where they find one of those friendships that is really, really crucial for them and these really, really good friends. And then out of that, a discipleship relationship happens that we've been talking about so much, where they can then come down here to maybe having a relationship they've never had before, where they can be completely candid and open about themselves. And it all started because they felt like they could belong right here. And that's where we come in. That's where we come in. And so how we do this, because again, our primary ministry is doing this through really surface level interactions. So what we have to recognize is that everything counts. Everything counts. In other words, recognize the influence of your tiniest interactions. Every single smile counts. Every single handshake, as Judy was talking about, counts. Every single extra thing you go to counts. Whatever you think will make a more personable experience counts. It all adds up to creating this culture of belonging we want people to experience. But on the flip side, the inverse happens too. Every time you don't smile counts. Every time maybe you let your a bitter attitude get in the way of interacting with somebody, that counts. Every time when you're more focused on getting the coffee pots replaced instead of focusing on the person who's viciously pumping their French vanilla creamer into their coffee because they're just so upset about whatever is going on, they're just like, it's like 10 servings, slow down, But every time we bypass somebody who probably is having one of the roughest days of their life because we're so focused on the task that makes us feel so important, because tasks just seem so much more important, every time we bypass a person for that counts. Counts. So what we have to do is every time we serve, we have to ask ourselves, do my interactions say, I want people here? Do my interactions say, I want people here? Because at the end of the day, everything counts. Everything that you do has the power to tell every person walking through our doors that they're noticed, that they're valued, and that they belong here. Because then when they feel like they can belong here, then that could get them plugged into all these other spaces of interaction, and that loneliness that they are just steeped in will begin to eradicate. And as this little lost wandering sheep outside of the circle of safety can be brought into this space of belonging, that is when their fullest potential can be recognized, and it starts with us. That's why we do what we do. But what I'm really excited about is you guys get to talk a little bit about what this looks like. So here in just a couple of minutes, we're going to actually split up into our teams as close as we can. We're divided a little bit by campuses and teams. So we'll get creative in trying to combine some campuses and services together. We'll do that here in a little second, but your team leads are going to lead you in some group discussions about what does this look like? What are some new things that we can start doing to